everyone. Welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay, and here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need in Israel to succeed, whether that is reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, flirting, dating, job interviewing, complaining, all the everyday things you do in your native language in your country of origin, but here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. Please be in touch with us. If you're joining us live on Zoom, you can always write to us in the chat window. That's there specifically for anything not having to do with today's specific class. So questions, comments, concerns, requests for our upcoming classes. You can also check out all of our previous lessons on YouTube. Simply go to youtube.com. Type in Cafe Oleh or Nefesh B'Nefesh. You'll see a playlist with all of our previous lessons, along with the spreadsheets that go with them. One last bit of housekeeping news. As has been the case, unfortunately, for this winter session, if you are here in Israel and unfortunately the air raid siren goes off, your safety is more important than keeping up with Hebrew. Please go find shelter that is considered safe. And stay there for the full 10 minutes until the all clear. We'll keep going, even if I have to go and seek safe space. This is being recorded and will be uploaded. You won't miss a thing. It's another one of the great reasons why this is all uploaded on YouTube, so you're able to go back, watch all of it at your convenience. If you need to step away for whatever reason, please do so. We will make sure that you get the recording in its entirety, whether it's emailed to you and or you simply go to YouTube yourself, you will see it. Okay, with that, one last piece of housekeeping, and we'll get to today's class. And I'll remind you also at the end of the class, this is the last class of this season and thus of this year. We're going to take a break, as we always do in between seasons, or sessions, however you want to call it, or semesters, if it will. And we will be back on, if I am not mistaken, it is Monday, January the 8th. So put that in your calendars now for save the date. We will resume in 3 weeks from today. You will receive an email. You will see it in Nefesh B'Nefesh's promotional materials, as well as on their Israel calendar. If you don't know what their Israel calendar is, I highly suggest looking at it online. But please check it out at your convenience. But we will resume on January 8th, so people can take a break, and we can take a break, hear all your suggestions, especially for those of you who have not had a time to check out all of our lessons. We're now well more than 100 lessons on YouTube. This is a great chance not only to review classes you've already taken live with us, but also go through and see what things we haven't done in a while or things we haven't done at all that you would like to see. But please check out its Nefesh B'Nefesh's most popular channel on YouTube, and it's one of our we get hundreds and hundreds of views for each class. It's highly recommended you all go there and look for our different classes there. And with that, let's get started with today's class. So today's class comes from a request from you, and it's very much fitting. We started this semester talking about the war, talking about the everyday words you needed to understand the war as a civilian. We talked about emotional responses and emotional resilience through all of this, and we talked about other things throughout this semester dealing with the war. And we've had a number of requests to talk about the Army. Now, if we were to talk about the Army and specifically the Israel Defense Forces, it would take many, 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 many lessons. So I'm going to do my best, not being an expert on the military, but thinking of you as civilians. We're going to approach it two ways. One, I'm going to show you a great shortcut to learn about many things and the terminology for them in Hebrew using a very common source I know I use on a regular basis. I'm sure some of you do as well. You probably just didn't put it together. And we're going to look at Army terminology from a civilian's perspective, specifically someone who wants to be watching the news. Remember that one of the classes we often do is on media literacy, how to read the news at even an introductory level. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you through terminology that when you listen to the news, especially in the last 2.5 months, These are the words that are going to come up again and again that you need to know. And then we're going to go through a basic structure of the IDF so you understand it and the terminology with it using, again, a very common resource. If you have any questions about this specific class as I'm talking, please write in the Q&A. Everything else goes in chat. If it doesn't have to do with today's class, please put in the chat. Only today's class, please write in the Q&A. There's 137 of you and just me. Really want to be able to answer as many questions about this specific class in its class time, and everything else I will get the transcript of and be able to look at and get back to you afterwards. Okay, with that, let me share my screen. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to go over some of these basic words that you hear all the time, at least on the news, and watching the news as religiously as I do. Maybe some of you here who are trying to learn it to keep up in Hebrew, I'm sure you're doing the same. But we're going to go through some of the major ones that you hear, and then we're going to go to a very important resource to help you understand sort of the basics of how the IDF is structured. So with that, let's get started. I'm not going to go through basic words here. Just one last piece. This is really important. When we talk about these vocabulary sheets I create for you all, I'm not a dictionary. That's a waste of my time and your time. What I try to put together are words you're not going to be able to look up in a dictionary, or you're going to need to use multiple sources to get to them. Instead, we're doing it like this. We don't, I know a lot of you have very burning questions about specific words. That's what dictionaries are for. And it's frankly, and I hate to be so blunt, it is a bit of a waste of our time asking me for specific words. I'm going through words that when you hear it on the news, and I've heard all these words used certainly in a day, if not multiple times in one day, you can't look these up because you don't necessarily know how they're spelled, let alone that they're constructed the way they are. Okay, so that's what we're gonna focus on. So you're gonna notice in the spreadsheet, I'm not putting in the name of the IDF in Hebrew. Sahal. First off, we talked about it. Second, you can look that up yourself. I'm not putting in the words for soldier or basic things like guns and things like that. Those are all things you can look up. Okay, these are words you cannot look up unless you have an understanding of what the word is, how it's spelled, and then how it's comprised. And I'm going to explain that right now. So what you're seeing in this first section are all acronyms and abbreviations. We've talked about this many, many times. Number one, Hebrew loves small condensed words. The fewer letters and the fewer syllables, the better in Hebrew, aesthetically and in every other sense. Number one. And number two, Israel's military, like all militaries around the world, uses abbreviations. Okay, if you're not used to that, that's fine. You don't have a military background. That's not a judgment on any of us. Okay, but that's how all militaries in the world operate. They use small, condensed words to get immediately to the command that's needed or the understanding what's needed, so they don't have to use extra time and space to issue a directive, to issue an order. Okay, and you're going to see that again and again. All of these words in this first section are all abbreviations and acronyms, and we know that, as we've talked about before, because they all have two apostrophes. In Hebrew, they're called gilshaim, between the second to last and last letters. Okay, and you're going to hear how I pronounce them as well. Some of these will be automatically generated by an automatic Nikud generator, the dots and bars that indicate vowel sounds. Most of them won't, but you'll hear the abbreviation used even on the news rather than the whole word. So start with the first one, amlach. Amlach stands for, and with each one, by the way, I'm going to say it how we pronounce it as an abbreviation and then what it stands for, as you see here each time in the Hebrew. Amlach stands for emtsa'e lechima. Emtsa'e is short for emtsa'im, and as we talked about a few weeks ago, compound nouns, remember? Compound words, where if the first word is plural and male, it becomes, instead of im, a. So instead of emtsa'im, it's emtsa'e, because the word following it is a noun. So emtsa'im are means or ways, okay? And lechima is battle, the act of engaging in battle. Okay, so amlach It stands for emtsa'e lechima. This is military equipment or weaponry. This is not just ammunition. Okay, it's not just bullets, it's also guns. It's also rifles and all the other instruments we use to conduct war, and called amlach. So if you watch the news, for example, this week, you will hear about the IDF going into civilian homes in Gaza and uncovering amlach in children's beds, in children's toys, in hospitals, and so forth, right? So amlach, you now know, stands for emtsa'e lechima, military equipment or weaponry. All right, next word, chapak. Chapak, you've heard this word also if you watch the news all the time. Chapak stands for Chadar Pikud Kidmi. Chadar is cheder, a room. Pikud is directive or order, the act of directing or ordering something. And this is a word that's going to come up again and again in various iterations with this shoresh, pei kuf dalet, again and again in army-related words. Kidmi, front, okay, or advance. Chadar Pikud Kidmi is shortened to chapak. This is a command post. Right. So, for example, if there is a situation unfolding or there's a big event in Israel, this is a better way to think about it. If there's a big event in Israel, there's always going to be a chapak, usually of the mishtara, meaning that the police set up a chapak from which they can control and oversee the event taking place. Okay, that's what a chapak is. And that is in juxtaposition or oftentimes actually quite similar to a chamal. We've talked about a chamal since the beginning of this war, in that almost every community and certainly every town in Israel has had a chamal that has been used to bring in donations of various kinds and then distribute them to needy families who have been displaced or soldiers. Okay, a chamal stands for Chadar Milchama. It can also stand for Chadar Mivtzaim, but usually it's a Chadar Milchama, a war room, right? In the literal sense, in the figurative sense, it is is similar to a chapak, a command room, but a war room is also a place where you bring in people of various disciplines and orders that will talk about all sorts of different things. But it's a place where you center and focus and concentrate all the different forces involved in a given command or in a specific directive. Okay. Pakal. Pakal stands for Pkudot Keva Lekrav. In English, we would call this a standard issue. A pakal could be anything from a it could be as simple as the pakal for your next assignment is to bring water. But a pakal usually think of like rations or think like equipment that is standard issue. It can also be meals. It can also be all sorts of other things. One of my clients in my everyday work, one of my former clients is a line of men's first grooming products made in Israel. And they developed a pakal, which was basically everything a man needed for shaving and face wash and trimming his beard and so forth, right? A pakal is something, it's a set of something that you need for a specific mission. But the best way to understand it is a standard issue, right? So for example, standard issue uniform, standard issue for going out in the following types of patrols, doing the following things, or you're doing field work and you need to bring food. What are the rations that you bring with you as opposed to eating on base? Pakal. This word you're going to hear a lot in the news, especially nowadays, and especially with everything that's going on, particularly both on the northern border as well as in the south. And when I say the south, way down south towards Eilat and farther south, a katbam. A katbam, or katbamim, if there's plural, stands for kli tais bilti meuyash. Okay, that's a long term, and that's why, remember again, kli tais bilti meuyash. That's 8 syllables. That's condensed into katbam. 2 syllables. Again, Is Hebrew likes that in general? Military likes that in general. You put it together, we have a lot of these acronyms and abbreviations that you can hear all the time. Some of them are adopted from the military. Some of them we just use because so many of us have served in the army, and because military service is universal here, generally universal, excuse me, it's well known, a lot of these terms. But if they're not, they're oftentimes re-explained, such as a katbam. Hopefully we don't have a lot of experience with a katbam. Kli tais, kli is any instrument or tool in general. Tais has to do with latus, flying. So a flying object or a flying instrument. Bilti, we've talked about this word a lot. Bilti means non or un as a prefix, non or un as a prefix in English. Me'uyash. Think about this word, me'uyash. What three letters do you think are its shoresh? Think to yourselves. If you said Aleph, Yud, Shin, you are correct. The word me'uyash ultimately comes from the word ish. Ish is a person, right? Or a man, but it can also just be a person. Me'uyash is manned, M-A-N-N-E-D. And we talked about this a lot. How do we create new words in Hebrew? We have different prefixes and suffixes we can use. We can also turn words, especially verbs, into participles. We've talked about this in previous lessons. Highly recommend once again to go to YouTube to check out our whole lesson on participles. But me'uyash, it comes from the verb le'ayesh, which means to man something, right? To staff it. So me'uyash is it's staffed, meaning it's manned. But in this case, we're talking about a kli tais, a flying vehicle or a flying instrument, bilti me'uyash, that is unmanned. Okay, a katbam is a UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle. If you didn't know that term in English, now you do. Okay, a katbam could be anything from a drone to all sorts of other types of flying machines that usually have some sort of ammunition in them or some sort of reconnaissance. They have a camera strapped to them, something that's providing information back to a home base. Israel uses katbamim on a regular basis. It has over the Gaza Strip, and it certainly does over both the West Bank and southern Lebanon, just as Hezbollah, especially on the northern border, has been sending katbamim, UAVs, over Israel. They're both surveillance and they're weaponized. Okay, but that's what katbam means. Til nun tet. This one we don't pronounce as a word. Instead, we spell it out. Til is a missile. Nun tet. Nun tet stands for neged tankim. Okay, Til nun tet, anti-tank missile. Til, missile, nun tet. That's how we say it, anti-tank missile. These are a lot of the amlach, the weaponry that's being sent on the northern border with Lebanon by Hezbollah into Israel. Patzmal. Patzmal is another type of amlach, another type of ammunition that you're hearing about a lot, especially from the northern border, but also in the battles taking place right now in Gaza Strip, as well as along the civilian communities in and around Gaza. Patzmal. Patzmal stands for Pitzutz Margema. Pitzutz is an explosion. Margema is mortar, M-O-R-T-A-R. Okay, so mortar fire is pitzutz malgema or patzmal. So you'll hear about this a lot. You'll hear about esh patzmalim. You'll hear about literally mortar fire. Okay, patzmalim are usually low grade, low range, make a lot of noise, make a lot of smoke and fire, cause some damage, but not nearly as much as a Til Nun Tet, an anti-tank missile, or a regular old Til. Okay. Okay, this is a really important one. Anyone who's had children or grandchildren in the military and or served themselves will know this term very well. This is a very important part of anyone's military service, but especially for Chayalim Bodedim. Chayalim Bodedim are lone soldiers. These are soldiers who, the vast majority of them have made Aliyah without immediate family in Israel. This can also include, by the way, Israeli citizens who serve in the army who don't have immediate family who can support them. That either means financially or ideologically. So a Chayal Boded could potentially be a soldier from a ultra-Orthodox, a Haredi family who doesn't support them being in the military. It could also be someone who comes from a family that has a lot of socioeconomic issues that can't support them. Okay, but it's usually reserved for soldiers who made Aliyah and can't and don't have any family here to support them, because family is a very integral part of everyday life in Israel, and especially serving in the military during your mandated conscription, starting at age 18, in terms of support, where you're going when you get a break from the army and so forth. But one of the other forms of support that you get in the army is from a mashak tash or a mashakit tash. Usually it's a mashakit tash, a female one of these. Sometimes it's a mashak tash. A mashakit tash or mashak tash, depending on their gender, is, as it says here, if it's a male, it's mefaked she'eno ktzin tna'ei sherut. Or if it's a female, mefakedet she'ena ktzina tna'ei sherut. First off, mashak. Mashak or mashakit stands for mefaked she'eno katzin, or for, excuse me, female, mefakedet she'ena ktzina. Mefaked is an officer. Excuse me, we can think of it as an officer in this case. She'eno katzin. This is a non-commissioned officer. Okay, this is someone who is not on commission in the military sense, not in the financial sense. Mefaked she'eno katzin, who's in charge of Tash. Tash stands for Tna'ei Sherut, the conditions of army service, literally. Okay, and what is this? Why is it so important? A mashakit tash, and again, usually it's a female who's filling in this role, is an officer who's in charge of soldiers' well-being and their welfare. Okay, this is the person who checks in on a soldier to make sure they're eating well, they're getting enough sleep, they have the means when they're off on break, especially if they're chayalim bodedim, they have enough money to buy groceries and keep up with their wherever they're living as a civilian in Israel. Or if they are a lone soldier and they're entitled to X number of days a year to go abroad to visit family, they're the ones through which this goes through to get the permission, right? Your mashakitash is essentially your social worker as a soldier. It's a very important role, no less important than your mefaked, your commanding officer. But a mashakitash is really there as your social worker, as the person in charge of your social welfare. So if you're having a problem, physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially, this is the person that a soldier would go to. Very important role. Okay. A few more, one more, in fact, acronym, and then we'll get to some other important everyday words in the army. Shachpats. Many of you I know in the last 2.5 months have been raising money or helping buy shachpatzim for people in soldiers, especially reserve soldiers throughout the country. A shachpatz stands for shichvat pitzutz. Shichva is a layer. That can be a layer of clothes, that can be a layer in the ground. All sorts of different things can be a shichva, but that's simply a layer. And pitzutz, we said before, an explosion, right? This is a ballistic or a bulletproof vest. You've probably also heard it pronounced as a vest kerami, a ceramic vest. It's the same idea. Shachpatz protects you from ammunition, be it an explosion from something or bullets. It's meant to be a protective layer for you. Okay, and you'll hear that word a lot. Certainly at the beginning of this war and throughout as shachpatz. We also use this term, by the way, metaphorically. If someone is the shachpatz for someone else, they're their wingman, their go-between, they're the person who's protecting them from something. Okay. A couple other words, and we're going to get to, you'll see it. I tried to organize this a little bit more after our array. There are many more abbreviations and acronyms. I didn't get to all of them, but these are just some of the ones that you'll hear on a very regular basis. Okay, let's keep going with these. Gimelim Anyone who's been in the military knows this term, and certainly families of those in the military know this term, gimelim. Gimelim is named after the army, the military form in the IDF that has to do with medical passes. Remember, in Israel, for example, if you want to get a day off of work for medical reasons, you need to get an ishur refu'i, right? You need to get a um, uh, medical approval of time off. You usually go to your doctor in person. Sometimes you can do it over the phone or by email or by video. I think you can also do it in some places. And you need a formal letter that it excuses you from work and uses your sick days from work. That's usually how it's traditionally done. There may be some workplaces that you all have, you don't need to do that, but that's the traditional way. The same thing applies in the military. In order to get a sick day, whether you or not you were injured or you're just sick and you need a day off, you need to get a what you call gimelim. And then when you go to the doctor, just like you do as a civilian, right? When you go as a civilian to the doctor in Israel, let's say you have the flu and you are a salaried worker, you need to take time off. Let's say it's a week. 5 days worth, right? You need to tell the doctor, they'll either ask you or you tell them how many days off you want. That comes out of your total amount of sick days for the year, right? And gimelim works similar. I don't know the total amount that you get, but you get X amount. We call them just in general gimelim. So you can have one gimelim. You can also, you'll hear people say one gimel, but it's usually in the plural because ideally, being in the military, even if you really love it, you want the time off. Whether you're sick, you're just need the time off, whatever it is, gimelim are an important part, just like getting any shul refu'i for work, so that that work it doesn't count against you. Same thing with gimelim. And finally, a word that's become really important with more than 300,000 reservists called up in the last 2.5 months is after. After is just as it sounds, whether you say after, like I do, or after, however you say the letter resh, comes from the word after, that good old after, right? After duty, meaning a break from army service, which can last anywhere from an overnight to several days. This is usually to let soldiers, and especially reserve soldiers, get home, take care of their belongings, take care of themselves, get a little bit of rest. That the order that's needed and the command that's currently in place allows for rotation of troops to have an aftel. One of my good friends is serving in Miluim right now, and he's had a series of aftelim throughout the last 2.5 months. Some have been just one overnight, like he had the other week. Some have been longer. Okay, but an after is a really important part of certainly in the last 2.5 months. Some soldiers have not had an after whatsoever this whole time. Some have had a lot, especially reserve soldiers. Okay, when we get to army service, there's 3 words you're going to hear all the time on the news. And it's important to differentiate these 3 forms of military service in Israel. Sadir, Keva, Miluim. Okay, Sadir, Keva, Miluim. Sadir is mandated service. This is the 2.5 to 3 years that all Israeli Jewish men and women do, with some exceptions. Druze do. Many Bedouins sign up for, and other people can volunteer serve in. But this is the mandated service that starts at 18 years of age, right? From there, from Sadir, you can continue your work in Sadir or be done after 3 years. Some people sign on for more, or you turn into Keva. Keva is salaried service. Now, even though you are making money, quote unquote, making money, because it's a very small amount of money in Sadir, Keva, think of Keva as a career service, right? This is career soldier. That's a better way to put it. Career service. Okay. These are usually higher ranks. These are people who are much more, you could call them commissioned officers if you'd like, but this is usually higher ranks. These are some of the top people you see on the news, either being interviewed as they served in the past, or they're being live interviewed, meaning they're currently in service, right? Keva is a longer service that is career. Okay, and then finally, miluim. Miluim, we talked about this word the other week, and many weeks before that as well, as the reserves. It comes from the same root as lemale, the verb for to fill, right? And it's the people who fill in the needed services during a war. So for example, now, many of the miluim, those who have been called up to miluim, are filling in roles that Sadil normally does, right? So if you were doing your Sadil in Ayosh, right? Ezorei Yehuda v'Shamron, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, they're often now in Gaza, in which case Miluim will be stationed in and around Ayosh in the West Bank. Okay, that's the idea of reserves. It fills in the gaps, fills in the services. Depending on what you did in Miluim, you'll be called up to, I forget how many weeks a year. Depends on what you did. If it was more combat, if it depending on how important it was, and to be constantly trained. That's the idea of miluim as well. It's not just to fill in actual operational ranks. It's also to be consistently and constantly trained, so that if you need to be called up, like now during the war, you are pre-trained enough to be able to go in as quickly as possible. Miluim can go up to the age of 45. Some people choose to go longer. It's volunteer at that point. But those are the three major forms of service. Okay. This next part, I'm going to show you a little bit more in what I promised as a resource, but I just want to give you these names before we get into them, because you're going to hear these words all the time. And again, this is not my background. I looked these up, but these are important because you're going to hear these words again and again and again and again on the news. Okay, I didn't put these in order. The resource I'm going to show you shortly will put these in order in terms of biggest to smallest and vice versa. But these are some of the terms you're hearing a lot. And we're actually, when the resource I'm going to show you is going to break it down how many people and what's included in each of these. But these are words you're going to hear all the time in terms of ranks and in terms of forces, number of people and equipment that's in the field. First off, Ugda. Ugda is a division. Khativa is a brigade. Pluga is a company. It's the smallest of all these ones that are here. A Gais is corps. And Chel is forces. Okay, I'm gonna define those in a minute. I just want to put those words up here so you had them as reference to when we go into them in a second. Okay, two words we've talked about before that are important. You have the chazit and you have the oref. Chazit is the front. Okay, it's the front. It's the front of battle. It's the front of whatever you're doing. And the opposite of the chazit is the oref. The oref is what we call in English the home front. Excuse me. The Oleh, by the way, is also the back of your neck, right? It's the idea, it's pulling up the rear. The Oleh will always refer to usually civilians, even though there's a military division called Pikuda Oleh, the Home Front Command, which is in charge of the air raid sirens and all the other protective warnings that we have that we've had for 2.5 months and continue to have in some places in this country. The Oleh usually refers to civilian life. Okay, a few more words, resource, and then answer your questions. As I see, we have a bunch in the Q&A. These are some of the words you've been hearing in the last few days. These aren't words you're going to learn in Ulpan. And they aren't necessarily military words, but in understanding the news. And we're going to go back to that in our next semester of how to read the news and how to listen to the news. We're going to also try listening skills next semester as well. So great chance in the next 3 weeks to work on that yourselves. But these are the words you've been hearing a lot on the news that are important to know. Mimulkad. Mimulkad is a participle, so it can be a noun, an adjective, and even a verb. Mimulkad is booby-trapped. Okay, it comes from the word malkodet, which is a trap. So mimulkad is something that's entrapped, meaning it's built to ensnare you, right? And that was the part of the tragic and very sad story from Friday, when soldiers mistakenly shot and killed 3 captured Israeli civilians who were trying to flee their captivity from Hamas. And why did it happen? Part of the context was that there are many batim memulkadim. booby-trapped homes in Gaza that the IDF has already encountered in attempt to lure in soldiers and then ambush them, right? And so memulkad is really important, a booby-trapped place. It could be a room, a house, any sort of space. This is also a really important thing because this is as much about giving updates as it is part of the ongoing PR efforts with regards to the war, and the psychological warfare on both sides is really important when you're talking about war. Is mechutar, which again, like memulkad, and I hope you can hear it, folks. Memulkad, mechutar. This is another participle, and it comes from the verb lekatel. First off, what word can you identify in the word mechutar and lekatel? I'll give you a hint. If you're looking at the screen, look at what I'm doing. If you said keter or keter, you were right. Keter in Hebrew is crown, right? Lekater is to besiege. It's to crown something, meaning that you've surrounded it on all sides. That's what lekater means, right? So if lekater is to besiege, what would be its participle meaning? Besieged. Mechutar is besieged, right? Meaning it's entirely encircled and thus it is in control by someone else. Whereas to besiege is the active form of it. Okay, important word. Similar in meaning is mukaf. Mukaf is encircled. Okay, but mechutar really is used in more military terms to mean that it is besieged. Also because that word besieged, right? Siege and besieged, very military sounding. And then two words that are connected to each other by their same root, kaf nun ayin, is lehikana. Lehikana is to surrender, and lehachnia. Lehikana is the passive form. Lehachnia is the causative form of this shoresh, and it means to subdue, to cause someone else to surrender. To cause something or someone to surrender, i.e. to subdue them. Okay, and that's what these two words mean. Very important right now as the IDF tries to take control of Gaza and over Hamas. Okay, I talked about these. Let's talk about something very specific with the IDF. And in doing so, I'm going to share with you a very important resource. And I share this resource with absolute full faith. I know it can be controversial for some people, but in this case, I think this is an important resource, an ongoing resource for all of you, which is, you got it, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is an amazing resource for all of us learning Hebrew. Why? Because many of the articles are translated into Hebrew, and you can simply go into Google, type in the word that you're looking for, and chances are in Hebrew, there's going to be an article about it. In this case, I found the article about Mivnei Tzahal. Mivnei Tzahal, the structure of Tzahal, the structure of the IDF. And it's broken down as an infographic into two important parts that are going to talk. I'm not going to go through these both because we don't have the time, and also this is your homework to do for the next 3 weeks, because the question was, how is the IDF broken down? I was asked about insignias and ranks, but also the different forms. Here it is, folks. This is the structure of the IDF. Okay, it says here, Talshim HaMivneh HaIrguni Shel Tzahal. The organizational structure, the structural flow of the IDF. And it starts here at the top, Hamateh HaKlali. In this gray box here, Hamateh HaKlali, General Command. And it says under it, Rav Aluf Herzi Halevi. We're going to get to the different titles in a second. But just know, this is the head of the IDF is in the Hamateh HaKlali, the General Command. You should know who that is right now. His title is Ramatkal, Rosh Mateh HaKlali, Rosh Hamateh HaKlali, the head of the General Command. Okay, and his ranking is Rav Aluf. We'll get to that all in a second. Okay, under him is a Sgan Ramatkal, the Deputy Ramatkal, and then it breaks down into 3 major sections with some extra ones on the left-hand side. Agaf, departments, Agafim, departments, excuse me. Zroot, branches. Zroot are branches. They can also be limbs, like your arms and your legs. And pikud. Pikudim are commands. Okay, so departments, branches, and commands, just like you have in all militaries. And you'll see here, it's a flow chart. You can go down and see where each one is. And if it's in blue, it means it's got a whole article about it, right? So for example, if I go into branches, Zroot, I can see that first off, there is Zoa Hayevasha. And this is the one we're going to focus on when we get into ranks. Zoa Hayevasha, ground forces. Okay, this is the branch that has to do with everything on the ground. You also have Zoa Avil Chalal, Avil, air, Chalal, space. So this is the Air and Space Command branch of the IDF. And you also have Zoa Hayam, the Marine or naval branch, right? It's also known as Chel Hayam, the Navy, but it's known officially, as it says here in the preview for Wikipedia, Zoa Hayam. Wikipedia, folks, is a really great resource in learning Hebrew, not just to find out things, but also to learn things. This doesn't exist in the English version. I'll give you really quick to prove it. You go at the top of any Wikipedia page and it'll say if it's available in other languages. And this is not using Google Translate, folks. We've talked about Google Translate. It gives you 50% of the meaning at best. This is a translation that's been approved by other editors for Wikipedia. If I went to the English version of this is what it looks like. There's no flowchart. There's some, if not most of the various departments and branches and things that I talked about, but it's not this, right? It's not the entirety of this. This is what you're going to want to go through and look at very carefully. So like I said, general command here or central command, and then it's broken down into departments, branches, and commands. In branches, like I said, it's in ground, air, and sea. Within ground, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have ground troops, Chel Regalim, Chel Hergalim, excuse me, Chel Shirion. Shirion are armored corps. So it's tanks and other vehicles. Chela Totchanim. Totchanim are Totach is literally a cannon, but Totchanim are, think of that mortar and other long-range missile, whatever you want to call it. Chela Handasa Kravit, combat engineering. Chela Ganata Gvulot, border patrol, border crossings, and in other different places that the army operates. Okay, so that's all within ground forces, as well as the other three. In other departments, you have, for example, here in Agafim, in departments, you have everything from technology and logistics. You have Agaf Koach Adam, a very important one. This is the manpower directive division. This dictates who's needed and where and what's needed in terms of, think of it like HR for the army. Dovel Tzahal, the IDF spokesman's office, is under the department's unit in the military. Agaf Modi'in, the intelligence corps, the medical corps, the military police, the unit that's in charge of policing the military and soldiers, logistics, education, all sorts of other things that are under departments. And over here in command, it's usually by geography. So Pikuda Tzafon, the northern command, Pikuda Melkaz, central, Pikuda Darom, southern, Pikuda Oleh, we just talked about. The home front command is under the same rubric as these other geographical ones, but it comprises all of Israel's civilian population. Okay, and some others, as well as on the other side that answer directly to, general command, is the Batei Adin Tzva'im, the military courts, Apraklitud Tzva'it, the JAG is, if you will, it's both the, it's not just the courts, it's also the whole legal system. Harabanut Tzva'it, the rabbinate of the IDF, and the military colleges. Okay, this is the structure of the IDF. I'm not going to go into each one of these. Again, Wikipedia is a wonderful rabbit hole to go down for, but this is the structure that's illustrated for you. Now I want to get into some ranks. I'm going to do this as quickly as possible because this is written out for you. By the way, there is a whole other article about this in Wikipedia. So if you want to read it, this is actually very good in English. I'll show it to you what it looks like. Israel Defense Forces ranks. You can go in, and this is a great article. Why? Why do I highly recommend it? It gives you the Hebrew and the transliteration. Good people. There are some really good people at Wikipedia, and it tells you every title here that I will never remember, and frankly, neither will you. So don't worry about remembering the difference between a seren, a rab seren, a sgan aluf, a aluf mishne, tatal. You're not going to remember these folks. Even if you watch the news as religiously as I do, you're not going to remember them. Okay, but they're all here. You're welcome to look at it. I'm just going to show you the Hebrew version because it's laid out a little bit differently and I think a little bit easier, which looks like, go back to it. Here it is. Okay, what it does here is that it adds those other words that we talked about. You'll see on the left-hand side, it says Dalgat Mefaked Yechida. It says the rank of the officer in charge of a given unit. Okay, it says Mefaked Yechida. The name of the person in charge of that unit, the makeup of that unit, Helkeva Yechida, and then the name of the unit and its insignia. So let's start at the smallest, right? When you come into the army, you are given, it's not on here because these are all officers, you come in at the rank of Rav Turai, a private officer. And it's two of these bars that you see at the bottom left here. Okay, the commanding officers of this lowest unit, and this lowest unit is a kita. Kita is both a room or like a schoolroom, but it also means a squad. Okay, kitat konenut, which you've probably heard a lot about since October 7th, on and since October 7th. Kitat konenut can be thought of as the community armed squad, the squad of civilians in a given community that are in charge of neighborhood watch, and it's armed. But a kita in this case is a squad, and it's defined here as shtaim ad chamesh chuliot, right? And under it, it says ke asara chayalei chil tank echad tutach echad. Approximately 10 foot soldiers, a tank, or a cannon. And I don't mean a cannon in the old sense, but whatever sort of long-range munition you're using. Okay, that's the smallest amount, and its commanding officer will have one of these ranks on their arm, on their upper arm, either a samal, a sergeant, or a samal rishon, a first sergeant. I just happen to know that one. Okay. And then you build up. If the kita, the squad, is the smallest, you then move up to the next one, a machlaka. A machlaka is the next one. We usually call that a department in everyday terms, but this is the next one up. And a machlaka has, as it says here, in smaller letters, ke 40 chayalei chil, 3 tankim, 3 totachim. Chil, which I showed you before in the branch, that is soldiers on foot. It's foot soldiers, for lack of a better term. This is all the infantry divisions you've heard of before. It can just simply be chil. It'll be called that on the news. Chil can just mean an infantry division. These are also some of the elite infantry divisions you've heard of probably, like Golani, like Givati, like Tzanchanim. All of these are part of the infantry corps, within chil, within foot soldiers. Okay, so if a kita has 10 up to 10 soldiers, the next unit up has 40, and that is run by a mefaked machlaka or segen mishne. You then move up to a pluga. A pluga, as we said before, and I even need to remember this, right? Because I don't remember these as well. A pluga is a company, right? So a pluga is the next one up. Pluga can have up to 200 soldiers, up to 11 tanks, 6 long-range guns, and that is the person in charge is a seren or a rav seren, and they'll have that insignia. These insignias, after we move up from a kita, are now on your shoulder on an epaulette, that flap that goes on the shoulder of a uniform. The next one up is a gedud. Gedud will have up to 500 soldiers and so forth. Okay, so it moves bottom up in terms of the size of the number of soldiers and or armored units or anything that each division is in charge of. And it tells you here the name of the division, how many are in it, and who the ranking officer in each of those. I'm going to give you this link. Don't worry about writing it down if you forget it. Okay, but this shows you a really great illustration, both because I don't know these things off the top of my head, as you can clearly see, but they're also clearly illustrated for you in a really nice chart to figure out what each thing means that you hear and what it is. So for example, you've heard a lot, unfortunately, in the last few weeks that there have been a lot of magadim who have fallen in battle. A magad is short for mifaked gdud. Okay, a mifaked gdud is in charge of up to 500 soldiers, up to 35 tanks, 18 long-range guns. That is a high-ranking official. Okay, so to lose a magad is a big deal. Also remember that in standard operations in the IDF, it's the commanding officer who goes in first, not the lowest ranking soldiers. So that's also the reason why so many have fallen in battle, but that's also a very important part of morale in the IDF, that it's the commanding officer who goes in first. Okay, and then it moves up to a chativa, a ugda. Ugda is comprising multiple gdudim, as it says here, and so forth. It moves up and up and up until you get to the head of all of Zroa Hayavasha, all of ground corps, who's at the aluf level. Okay, really basic underpinning of how it all works. There's also for the Air Force, for the Navy, and it keeps going. There are some really great resources to understand all this on Wikipedia, both saying that in general and specifically for the IDF. Okay, so we have a bunch of questions and we're about to run out of time. Q&A, let's go. Please stop sending emojis during the class. It is distraction and rude. Maybe it's an age thing, and I'm not trying to be patronizing when I say that. I don't have a problem with emojis. I get that can be distracting for some people, but this is the way that a lot of people communicate in 2023. If it is distracting, we can have a side conversation about that, but I personally don't find that, and especially for me being the teacher in front of 150 people, it's good to get some feedback, because this is a webinar and I can't have you all on camera, much less unmute you. It's a quick way for me to know where I'm at. So I apologize that it is distracting for some people. I'm sure there's a workaround on your specific Zoom to get rid of that. That's all I need to say about that. Why is it Chadar Milchama instead of Cheder Milchama? Great question. This gets back to our lesson about smichut, about compound words. Cheder is one of those other words that is going to change. Let me just pull that up. Cheder is a word that is going to change for very complex reasons I'm not going to get into when it's in a compound, when it's part of a compound noun. So cheder will turn into Chadar Milchama. Chadar Ochel, a dining room. We don't say Cheder Ochel, it's Chadar Ochel. Okay, I'm not going to get into it, but just know it changes. And it's only when it's the first part of a compound word does it do that. Okay, but as you see here in chapak and chamal, that's the case. Great question. Doesn't kli mean vessel or dish? Yes. Like I said, Hebrew doesn't have a huge amount of words. So some words have multiple definitions, like the word kli. It can be a dish, it can be a tool, it can be a vessel, it can also be an instrument, all at once. Right? For abbreviations like katbam, you seem to be pronouncing with the dagesh and the bet. Is there a rule such as abbreviations usually that are pronounced with the dagesh, or is it based on the word it is abbreviating? There are no definite rules with regards to how you pronounce these. Again, because these are created by the military. They're not created by grammarians. They're created to make sure that the directive and the order is as clear as possible for the people who need to know it. So these all don't follow a direct way. So for example, amlach, even though there's only two words here, you can see that it's the first two letters of the first word and the first two letters of the second word that are used. Whereas when it's quote unquote neither, right, like chapak, where it's just the first letter of each of the three words, or like katbam, the first letter of the four words, it's not always so clear cut. But usually these will follow standard standard pronunciation rules in Hebrew, which is the last syllable is the one that's emphasized. So that's why it's katbam, right? The emphasis, the generic default emphasis in modern Hebrew is on the last syllable. In Ashkenazi Hebrew, it's on the second to last syllable. So that's why this word, when pronounced as the abbreviation, is katbam. And that's the person is asking about the dagesh, the dot that goes into the letter vet. So it's katbam. Again, that's part of a very complicated further answer to why it's pronounced like that. And it also gives you a clue that the emphasis is on the last syllable, katbam. But also because the word is kletais bilti meuyash, right? The word is abbreviated from bilti, none. Why are the words pikudot and meuyash spelled with both the vav and the nikud under the letter? I love this question because the answer is because I love you all, right? Remember, we've talked about this multiple times when we've talked about nikud, dots and bars that indicate vowel sounds. I write in the dots and bars for you, as well as the letters, how it's spelled without them. So meuyash, if I was spelling this correctly for you, would have the dot here in the middle of the vav. The automatic nikud generator that I use does not like when you use the helper letters, what we call emot kriya. And so it'll point out, it'll have an optional choice because it's only about nikud. We've talked about this before, ktiv chaser and ktiv maleh. Ktiv chaser is when you would leave out this vav and it would have those three dots under the aleph. Ktiv maleh is when you put in the vav because that's how you spell it without vowels. Remember, the default in Hebrew is we don't use nikud. And the only way I know how to read this word without all of these is with that vav there. If that vav wasn't there, I wouldn't know how to pronounce this word. It could be multiple different things. The moment this vav is there, there's only one way I can pronounce this word and for it to be understood by me, the reader, and by others as the speaker. Okay, so that's why the automatic generator does that. I usually try to go back and correct it because I know that's confusing for people as it is here with kudot, but that's the reason why. Okay. If that's still too complicated, we have a whole lesson on this. YouTube again. Look up vowels. How many soldiers does each one look after? Like I showed you here, when you start reading through the list of each mivneh, right, from a squad up, it starts saying in it, right? So it says, a kita has up to 10 soldiers and a tank and heavy weaponry. The next one, machlaka, has 2 to 5 of these squads, i.e. 40 soldiers. A pluga has 2 to 5 machlakot under it, and so forth. So it's listed here. Trust you to use Hebrew to read these. It's gimelim. It's not gmelim, it's gimelim. It's slang military terminology. It's not necessarily going to correlate with everyday standardized Hebrew. That just like with all military jargon. Is gimelim the same as a sick day? Yes, that's the exact meaning of it. I heard an Israeli can be in border police instead of the IDF. Does the border police use a lot of the same terms and acronyms as the IDF? Yes, there are a lot of similar ones, but the police, first off, border patrol, Mishmar Gvul or Magav, as it's abbreviated, is part of the police. It is considered national service, but it's under the police, not under the IDF. They have their own rankings. The police has slightly different terminology for their ranks than the IDF, but they're all similar in terms of how they're structured. What is the infinitive for mukaf? Lehakif. It comes from the verb lehakif. Lehakif is to encircle or to encompass. Or, for example, my slang dictionary is over there, but it's milon haslang hamakif, the comprehensive slang dictionary. So mukaf comes from lehakif. Mukaf, for those of you who are at a slightly higher level of Hebrew, that is hif'il. Who currently is the head of the IDF command? So we can know who's making the decisions. The head of the name, as you saw here, it's actually listed quite right here, so you can see it. Pull it up. This is a standard name that's known in all, for example, in most public spaces, including in schools, there's always going to be pictures of the prime minister, the president, and the head of the IDF, the head of the Ramatkal, the Rosh Mata Klali, whose name is Herzi Halevi. If you didn't know who this was, you'll see this picture hung in official places throughout Israel. Okay. I can't see the wiki URL. Folks, don't worry about the URL. I already said that. If you didn't hear it, don't worry. I always send the links that we go through together. I'm not leaving you out in the cold. Hold on just a second. Is there a free Hebrew vowel generator on the internet? Yes, there is. Go back and watch our class on vowels. I talk about it there and even show you the website. It's called Nakdan, but I refer you to that specific lesson because it's in that lesson's description as well as in the class itself. How many soldiers does the social worker usually look after? I don't remember off the top of my head. It's usually a pluga or a machlaka. It's not as small as a kita, but it's usually one of the smaller divisions that a mashakitash is in charge of the soldiers. Enough, just like a social worker, they have a file on everyone, but it's usually the second or the third smallest from the lowest, excuse me. An important question. What is the word for hostage? So this is a tricky term. And when I have a weekly call with family and friends to talk about the situation here, I talk about this because in Hebrew, we have two different words, and in English, we don't. And it's very important in Hebrew how we talk about the 132 who are still kidnapped, the terms that we use. And we have two words in Hebrew. And if it'll let me make it bigger, just 1 second. Let me make these bigger for you all to see. Great. Okay, view, full screen. Okay, there are two words that you're going to hear a lot. And let me actually yeah. Shvuim, shvuyot. Okay, sorry. Chatufa, chatufim, chatufot. Okay. In English, we could translate both of these lines as captive, as hostage, but they're not, and it's an important difference. We can call these in a general sense hostage, but what it really means, let me write it here, hostage. The actual term for hostage is actually different than both of these, which is sorry, it'll let me, come on, ben or bat, bat. Oh, come on, computer. There we go. Let me make this bigger for you all. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay. Okay. We have three terms here. All right. Three terms here. This last one is the best direct translation as hostage. These other three can be. A hostage is different than a captive or a kidnapped person. First off, a hostage is someone who is being held up at gunpoint or being threatened in an immediate sense, right? That could be, for example, on October 7th, there were many B'nai Aruva, that's the plural, B'nai Aruva, Ben, Bat, B'nai, Benot Aruva, being held on kibbutzim and throughout the South at the time. That's a hostage. These other terms are best described, are translated as captive, kidnapped. Now, what's the difference? In the Israeli media, when we talk about these three, B'nai Aruva is someone who's being held hostage at a given point, meaning that they are caught where they are, that the terrorist gunmen, whoever it is, are holding them at gunpoint or at some stage where they were originally found. Okay? The other two have been taken to another location, captive and kidnapped. The difference in Israel is important, though. We only use the term shavui, shvuya, shvuim, shvuyot, depending on gender and the amount, for soldiers. This is only for soldiers. Right? Now, even though, and this is also important for all you who come with a stronger Jewish background, even though the mitzvah, the commandment of redeeming captives, and it's applied to both civilians and soldiers alike, pidyon hashvuim, uses the term shvuim. In modern Hebrew, which is what we learn in this class, it means captive, and it's almost always referring to soldiers. If you're referring to civilians, it's this word. Chatuf, chatufa, chatufim, chatufot. Okay? That means kidnapped. Now, in English, we can sort of play around with these two a lot. And hostage means the same thing like it does in Hebrew. A hostage is someone who is stuck in a situation, being threatened where they were at. They're usually not taken to another place. The equivalent would be being held hostage in the Chader Ochel, the dining room in Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th, versus being from Kibbutz Be'eri and being taken to Gaza. The moment they're taken out of their homes or somewhere else, especially into Gaza, they are a chatuf if they're a civilian, and they're shavui if they're a soldier. That's the distinction we use in modern Hebrew in Israeli society between these three. Okay, but that's the term for all of these. And when we're talking, especially on the news, even though the 132 include soldiers, we use chatufim. Understanding that the majority of them are right now are civilians. Okay, some more Q&A if we have time. Can I transliterate the three? Yes, I'll do it really quickly. And it'll certainly be in the spreadsheet that we'll share. Shavui, chatuf, and ben, bat, benei, benot, we'll figure this out. We'll send this all out to you formatted when it goes out with the recording. Okay, with here, we're going to stop. Thank you all for joining. Toda rabah. You will get both a recording of this video, a copy of the spreadsheet, and links to those Wikipedia articles so you can look them up yourselves at your own convenience in the next day or two. Please look into your email as well as on YouTube for that update. And like I said, we will see you in 3 weeks from now. Stay tuned. Save the date on your calendars, folks. We get a lot of emails saying, I didn't hear about the sign up. I didn't hear about the sign up. You're getting it 3 weeks in advance. Check your email. Check all Nefesh B'Nefesh material, and more importantly, check out the Israel calendar on Nefesh B'Nefesh's website for updates on it. But we will be back here on Zoom Monday, January 8th. Until then, Toda rabah. Thank you all so much. Besorot tovot. May we only have good news until we meet again. And lehitorot. Take care.